more creative a person is, the more deeply they experience anxiety. That's probably not how you've been thinking about anxiety, one of the most misunderstood human experiences. But let me read you something from the great Rollo May and his immensely important and criminally underrated book, The Meaning of Anxiety. I want to read something to you and build on that to explain why anxiety is far from this monster as we perceive it in the modern age, and why is it far from an exclusively negative experience, why it can be a creative force, why it should be a vitalizing, life-enhancing force, or at least it should be channeled in a way to serve as a vitalizer and life enhancer. Rollo May says, one has anxiety because it is possible to create. Creating oneself, willing to be oneself, as well as creating in all the innumerable daily activities. One would have no anxiety if there were no possibility whatever. Remember the word possibility. It is valuable to let patients in therapy know this, to point out that the presence of anxiety means a conflict is going on, and as long as that is true, a constructive solution is possible. To let the patients in therapy know this, well, Rollo May was hoping for existential or humanistic existential therapy to hopefully become a predominant form of therapy, a more human, more holistic form of therapy. That didn't happen, so I'm not sure. I don't want to make a general statement and attack modern mainstream therapy as a whole, although maybe that could be a valid attack, but I will just say it is the case that a lot of therapy doesn't really send the message that Rollo May considered to be a constructive message, to say, listen, the fact that you're experiencing anxiety means there is a conflict going on, and that's actually good. As long as there is a conflict going on, a constructive solution is possible. Another thing that Rollo May said in relation to this is like experiencing a fever. When you're having a fever, that's a sign that your body is fighting something, which is what? It is a sign of health. Your body is healthy enough to fight against something, to fight against a virus, I suppose. To leave those analogies aside for a moment, because we actually don't want to equate mental health problems, issues, challenges, we don't want to equate them with purely physiological challenges like fever or a broken bone. For example, Maslow said we made a tremendous mistake of putting depression in the same category as a broken bone. So, leaving that analogy aside, let's talk about anxiety in a more existential sense, which will be in a more creative and constructive sense. One has anxiety because it is possible to create. And then right away, May says, creating oneself. So we understand at the very first step of this explanation that creativity and creation is not reserved just for artists. It's not reserved just for the painter, for the musician, for the sculptor. You listening to this right now, even if you never engaged in the traditional arts, to put it that way, you still are a creator. You still are a creative person in your own right. Just by the virtue of being a human being, you are creative. That's a silly mistake that we make, to say, I'm not a creative person. Creativity is a layer of human existence. Now, you might not be the next Beethoven or Tolkien, me neither, but that doesn't mean we are not creative. We are creating ourselves, we are creating our lives, and we are creating, as May says, in these innumerable daily activities. Then, if there were no possibility, there would be no anxiety. Possibility is another layer of human existence, because you are not a dog, or let's say you're not a puppy that can only become a dog. There are not so many options for a puppy, and there are no choices to be made by the puppy. It, with the grace of nature and good fortune, will get enough food and it will grow into a dog. And that's it. You as a human being have almost infinite options, infinite possibilities, and infinite choices. That's the creative aspect of human existence that we cannot deny. That's also a great argument against people who say that you can just let yourself go and make no choices, not strive for anything, not commit to anything. You can just let yourself be carried by the flow of life, and you will end up right where you are supposed to end up. It is a very questionable philosophy when you take into account that as a human being you are, once again, not a dog. It's not like there is one path. There are infinite paths. So decision has to be part of it. Your own will, decision, choice, commitment. And that's where anxiety steps in. You are faced with these innumerable, infinite paths, options, choices, decisions. Anxiety stands there as something that initially creates resistance between you and any given path. However, it is also a signal that there is creative human energy in you asking to be actualized by you moving through anxiety and actualizing one of those paths. Now, let's read a bit more of Rollo May. This is him paraphrasing or explaining the philosophy of Soren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher and theologian, the first thinker to write directly about anxiety, the godfather or grandfather or father of existentialism. Most people say alongside Friedrich Nietzsche. I have been mentioning him in a lot of my writing over the past 6 years, also in a lot of my videos. Kierkegaard influenced Rollo May to a great extent. Maybe that's enough trivia and history, and let's get into it. In every experience, the individual wishes to move ahead, actualizing his possibilities. But at the same time, he plays with the prospect of not doing so. That is, there is in him or her a wish not to actualize his or her possibilities. Kierkegaard would describe the difference between the neurotic and healthy, important distinction, neurotic and healthy state by saying that the healthy individual moves ahead despite the conflict. This is going to become immensely clear. The healthy individual moves ahead despite the conflict, actualizing his or her freedom, whereas the unhealthy person retrenches to a shut-in position, to a shut-in condition, sacrificing his or her freedom. Okay, shut-in position. I think the expression of being a shut-in is fairly common today. This is hopefully relatable because what Kierkegaard was talking about and what Rollo May is conveying to us is something that we are all familiar with to some extent, on some level of awareness. You know that you can feel how engaged in life you are. That is on some level of resolution. Maybe you cannot feel it clearly, but in some way you can feel at different stages of your life whether you are the healthy person moving despite the conflict. What is the conflict? Well, the conflict is usually the fact of human existence, that is innumerable paths, uncertainty about innumerable paths, which one to choose, the responsibility of making the commitment, the conflict between what? Between freedom and possibility. If there were no possibility, there would be no anxiety. Well, you have possibility, you have possibilities, innumerable possibilities. What do you also have? You have the freedom to choose. Well, a lot of possibility and the freedom to choose creates an internal conflict. And there you have it. There's anxiety. Then you take on the responsibility to engage in that freedom, to use your freedom to choose. Hopefully, you can see how pieces are falling together. Now, to go back to that awareness. Awareness, am I moving ahead despite the conflict? Which means what? Am I taking on the responsibility to use my freedom to move ahead despite the conflict? Or am I retreating from life? Am I retreating into a shut-in condition? Am I trying to escape the overwhelming sense of possibility and freedom, and therefore responsibility? I would not accept anyone saying that they cannot, on some level, to some extent, feel the difference between moving ahead and retreating from life. That's one of the things, or one of the reasons why I started to write 6 years ago and to share my writing online. One of the reasons why I'm here. I felt when I was retreating from life, even though some aspects of my life, it seemed like I was very successful, I had a lot of things going for me, I knew I was retreating from life. I can look at different moments of my life where I was failing by many of the society standards. I wasn't ticking a lot of the societal boxes, but I knew that I was moving ahead, I was making choices, I was engaging in life. I was creating myself, creating my life. I was engaging in that creative act. And that gives you an immense sense of empowerment. It gives you an immense sense of momentum, self-reliance, self-trust, self-respect. And then with those things, with those inner resources such as self-trust, self-respect, self-reliance, then you start ticking the boxes, societal boxes once again, those that you want, and maybe you want to tick a lot of them. Why not? But then you're ticking them off while also being engaged in life. And you're ticking them off authentically. So I would refuse to believe that someone watching this cannot say, I feel when I'm disengaging, when I'm moving forward. And to make this clear, it's not always clear, black or white. It's not as if every single one of you will say, yes, I'm definitely retreating from life, or yes, I'm definitely moving ahead despite this internal existential conflict that is present in all of us. No. Most of you will say, well, I can notice myself in certain moments, situations, under certain circumstances, retreating, and I can notice myself in certain moments or under certain circumstances moving ahead. But then the vast majority of you, based on that, will be able to say, okay, what is my overall experience, my lived experience, internal experience of life? Is it predominantly moving ahead, or is it predominantly retreating? And there you have one of the most important questions of your life. Are you engaged in life, or engaging in life, or are you trying to move backwards? Are you trying to retreat into that shut-in condition? Regardless of what the answer is, the main message is that this inner conflict is not a sign of sickness. This inner conflict, as we said, is a feature of human existence, of such overwhelming but also magical, beautiful, confusing, mysterious existence, which involves innumerable possibilities and freedom to choose, which then creates a responsibility to use your freedom to choose, where anxiety is a natural response. Initially, that's also something I talked in previous videos, and I will keep saying that. I will keep saying that until my last day, anxiety never, 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 never has an unnatural source. All anxiety starts as normal anxiety, as first proposed by Kierkegaard and later explained and brought to more clarity to general population by Rollo May. All anxiety starts as normal anxiety that is arising from these internal conflicts that are no proof of something being wrong with you. Internal conflicts that are part of the human existence. It is the way that we deal with anxiety that makes it neurotic. We had the term neurotic here, and I always keep talking about neurosis and keep trying to explain what neurosis means because such a vague and sometimes problematic term. So anxiety becomes neurotic. It becomes what we call today this mental health problem, and then people want to make again this big monster out of it. It becomes that only when we are dealing with it in an unconstructive, not courageous, I don't want to say cowardly, not courageous manner, not creative manner, maladaptive. And we live in a world that is perfect for maladaptive attempts at resolving or escaping from uncomfortable internal experience. All the substances, all the devices, all the forms of escapism, it makes it so tempting to not lean into this internal conflict, recognize it as a call to adventure, but rather try to medicate it away. By using the verb medicate, to medicate, I don't mean to take a pill necessarily, although that people also do that. I mean to medicate it through different escapism, to different forms of escapism, which can be, which can range from adult movies to doom scrolling to Netflix to binge eating. In any case, if we recognize that anxiety never starts from a unnatural, sick source, but always originates from the complexity of human experience, then we know that there is something that we are supposed to respond to. And maybe the two biggest challenges that we need to respond to are to recognize what are these unhealthy ways of dealing with anxiety that we are most susceptible to, so that we could stop using them in order not to make our anxiety into neurotic and not to make our internal experience such of thinking something is wrong with us. And I also described the shame spiral multiple times. That's one challenge. The other challenge is what are the choices, possibilities, and challenges in front of me? Where in my life am I called to use my creative freedom? That is the freedom to create myself and create my life. And I'm called to do it. Once again, possibility, freedom to choose come together into the responsibility to create yourself and your life. So I'm hoping this video will be watched for years to come. Maybe that's an arrogant thought, but I believe it will stand the test of time. But since it's being recorded on the 30th of December, I think it's valid to say that it's evergreen and time specific at the same time, because as we are bringing this year to a close and entering a new year, I think it's fair to ask yourself, where am I being called to use my creative freedom? And if I want to use my creative freedom, maybe I should cut down or eliminate those behaviors or habits that I'm using to medicate myself from life. Let's not medicate life away. Let's not medicate that natural internal conflict away. let's lean into it and respond to it. And I here stand in front of you as a human being whose life has been saved, quite literally, and then changed, and then enriched, and then expanded with this exact approach, that is recognizing I'm not sick, nothing is wrong with me. The fact that I've been dealing for years with anxiety was not a sign that I messed up in some way. I had to respond to it. And yeah, not to talk about myself too much right now, but if I can say so, it's been an interesting journey, and I love every bit of it. And I know you can have the same journey, not the same in the steps that you take, but the same in the depth and the passion that develops from that depth. So lean into the natural internal conflict, respond to the call, start using your freedom to actualize your possibilities, start using your freedom to create yourself in your life. Thank you.